Hello, my name's Jackie and welcome back to my channel. I'm an aspiring fiction writer, and in this video I want to talk about consequences in fiction. And what brought this on is that I've been using my time in self-isolation very wisely by binging Community, which I haven't seen before. And there's a lot of commentary online that says the first 3 seasons of Community are really good, and then things drop a bit in season 4 and 5 when Dan Harmon left the writing team. And I think that's true. I think things do hit a bit of a lull and they get a bit tiresome in seasons 4 and 5. And I'm not sure if this is a symptom of Dan Harmon leaving or not, but one of the reasons I found these seasons really annoying is that there is a lot of build-up with no payoff. So there are 2 big examples of this for me. One is that there's a character called Chang who allegedly has Changnesia, or a twist on amnesia, yet we as the audience know he's faking because we keep seeing him in these shadowy corners making secret phone calls about how he's going to tear everyone apart. And then nothing comes of it, and we have several episodes of this pattern where he's planning something and then suddenly he's welcomed into the group and he doesn't care anymore. And I don't mind that as a resolution to the problem, but there should have been some payoff before that happened, as opposed to there was this build-up and no climax. And a similar thing happened with the evil Abed storyline, where a roll of the dice led to 6 parallel dimensions branching off from the main Community universe, and there's one where everything went horrifically wrong and everyone's evil now. And we've seen several flashes of this evil alternate world where the evil cast of characters is planning to break into the world with the good cast of characters, which they do eventually, but it's resolved in less than an episode, I think. The final showdown is very, very brief, and for something that's been built up for most of the season, you'd expect a bigger payoff, especially considering in earlier seasons there were double episodes for paintball tournaments, for instance. So all in all, I think that contributed to making these seasons of Community feel really unsatisfying. And I think that can happen in any form of fiction when you do have a lot of build-up and you don't pay it off. And I have 2 other TV examples, one of when this was done really well and one of when this is done really poorly. The first one is Californication. So if you're not familiar with Californication, Hank Moody is a writer who has moved down to LA because that's where his ex and his daughter have moved, and he absolutely hates it. But he's staying there because ultimately he would like to get back together with his ex Karen and be a family again with their daughter Becca. Now unfortunately Karen is with someone else when the series starts, an architect I believe called Bill, who has a daughter called Mia. Now episode 1 starts, we see that Hank doesn't really have his life together, he's sleeping with everything that moves, he's drunk most of the time, he's a writer but hasn't written anything in years from the look of it, so everything's falling apart. And one day he goes into a bookstore and stumbles across a young woman reading his book, and she looks at it, looks at the back picture, goes, "It's you." And he's like, well, yes, guilty as charged, and they sleep together. And it's not until the very end of the episode that we realize that this woman is Karen's fiance's 16-year-old daughter, Mia. So not only has he slept with the wrong person in terms of social ties, he's slept with the wrong person in terms of their age, and this is a criminal offence. So as you can imagine, there is this ever-present threat of being outed as having slept with a 16-year-old girl, and it's the sword hanging over him for the first 3 seasons of this series. And even though he does make some progress towards getting back together with Karen and building a family again with his daughter, it never feels safe because there's this ever-present threat. Then in the very last episode of season 3, it comes out and it ends with Karen screaming at him, his being taken away by cops. And then the entirety of season 4 is dealing with the aftermath of this. So he's put on trial as a sex offender, and they spend the entire season dealing with this trial and him trying to rebuild trust again with Karen, and both Mia and Bill testifying in terms of the fallout. And I thought that was an example of consequences done really well. It wasn't something where there was one episode and they went, oh well, that happened, but everyone's grown up, it was consensual, it's done. Which they could have quite easily, because even though she was underage at the time, it was consensual. They are all adults at this point in time. And it would have been very easy to out him and then push all of that aside, and then he just needs to work on his relationships with Karen and Becca. But they made the fallout a really big thing. It took an entire season of this show. And that was appropriate given that this threat had been looming for 3 seasons previously. And in the end, he does get let off, but it feels like that victory was earned because it was so long in coming. When it comes to the later seasons of Californication, I do think it lost something because it didn't have that threat anymore, but up to that point, I think the first 4 seasons were quite good. So that was an example of what I think is consequences in fiction done really well. An example of consequences in fiction done really poorly is Younger. Now, Younger is a show where a character called Liza, who I think is 41 in the first season, is trying to go back to work after her ex-husband gambled away all of their money and she needs to pay for her daughter Caitlin's tuition. I think she's a university student but is doing an exchange in India at the beginning of the season. And Liza, who worked in publishing in her 20s before she had her daughter, is trying to find a job for the first time in I think about 15 years. And unfortunately, she's really struggling to get a foot in the door because she's considered too old or too experienced for the junior roles, but she doesn't have any recent experience to step straight into a more senior editorial role. Then, one day, she's at a bar and a 26-year-old guy tries to pick her up and she sort of brushes it off like, seriously? And, aren't I a bit old for you? And he goes, oh no, we're about the same age, aren't we? And to be fair, she does look very youthful. She doesn't look 26 years old youthful, but for the purposes of the story, he thinks she's around the same age as her. And this gives her the idea of, well, why don't I remove my experience from my resume? I'll say I went to college, I was traveling, and now I'm back and I'm looking for an entry-level role. And she finds an entry-level role as a marketing assistant at a publishing firm after convincing everyone that she's 26 years old. Now, obviously, this is a very different setup to Californication. Younger is a very light-hearted comedy, whereas Californication is also a comedy, but a much darker one. So the stakes aren't as high. However, there is this situation where there's a secret that could potentially come out, and there's that tension for most of the series. Now, like Californication, there are moments throughout the series where one person at a time finds out her secret. So first her younger boyfriend finds out, then later her best friend at the publishing company, both of whom are in their 20s. And there is fallout from each of those, which I think was done quite well. There was a very personal betrayal each of them felt, and it did take time for those relationships to be mended. My problem comes in, I think, season 6, where she is outed to the public. And even though a lot of her close circle know, like her ex-boyfriend, her current boyfriend, her friend in publishing, they all know, most of the people she's worked with and a lot of the new friends she's made have no idea that she is an older woman masquerading as a woman in her 20s. So I don't know about you, but given that this has been 6 seasons in the making, I'd expect there to be significant fallout. I'd expect maybe she can lose her job, or maybe there's a HR thing, or maybe there's a media scandal because it does come out publicly. And there isn't really any of that. There are some consequences, like her current partner, who's the head of the publishing company, he had actually already left at that stage in order to protect her. And then there's also her other close friendship with the woman who had been her boss up to this point in time. And there's a betrayal there, which I think is solved in about an episode. But other than that, life continues as per normal. She continues going to work each day, the company continues producing books. There is a media interview where she doesn't really get a chance to tell her story, but nothing comes out of it. It's extremely unsatisfying to the point where, even though I quite liked the concept of the series, partly because it brings me hope that when I get back to Australia, maybe I can pretend to be in my mid-20s and start again. But even though I like the series, I don't know if I'll continue with it because I was so unsatisfied about the payoff for this reveal after it had been built up for so long. And admittedly, if you compare it to Californication and we get into Californication season 5, at that point it does feel like life has returned back to normal, but it took a season to get there. There was an entire season dedicated to dealing with the fallout of the big secret. In Younger, it was 2 episodes and then we're done, with the occasional reminder of, oh yeah, you were outed earlier this year. So all in all, very unsatisfying. So what is the point of this ramble? Well, simply that I think build-up in fiction is amazing. I think tension is awesome, stakes are great, but if stakes are high and tension is high and there's been a lot of build-up, and then something falls apart or something is revealed, something explodes, there needs to be some sort of aftermath. There need to be consequences. There needs to be fallout. Otherwise, it feels like everything that happened beforehand didn't really matter. And if you're working on other pieces of fiction in the future, or you're working on a series where there could potentially be other situations like this, they lose their credibility because we saw that, well, the last one didn't really change anything, so why should we believe that the next one will? So that's my fiction ramble for today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give me a like and subscribe because that keeps YouTube happy, and I will see you next time. Bye.